everyone. This is the International Council for Small Business, and this is the ICSB Exchange webinars. My name is Ayman El-Tarabishi. I'm the ICSB Executive Director, and I am also the Deputy Chair of the Department of Management at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I am delighted with this ICSB Exchange webinar, and I would like to officially and formally introduce Dr. Winslow Sargent, the ICSB President-elect. Dr. Winslow, it is great to see you here, and you are moderating this session, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Tarabishi. It's great to be here. Greetings, guten Abend, bonjour. We are carried all over the globe, and so I just wanted to acknowledge and thank you for taking the time to join us on this webinar. I am honored and privileged today to have a conversation with Prince Constantine, and on a topic that is very important in this time of our history. We're dealing with global changes due to a number of things, and so the conversation we'll have is titled Societal and Economic Shifts. So these are shifts due to COVID-19. But let me give you a brief background on Prince Constantine. Prince Constantijn van Oranje leads Techleap.nl, the accelerator for the tech ecosystem in the Netherlands. As special envoy, he is on a mission to turn the Netherlands into a unicorn nation. He and his team connect the Dutch tech ecosystem to help ambitious and promising Dutch tech companies grow fast internationally by improving their access to capital, market, and talent. Constantijn van Oranje co-founded Startup Fest Europe, which is still the biggest startup event ever organized in the Netherlands. He used to be the chief of staff to Vice President Nelly Kroes at the European Commission, in charge of the digital agenda, and led the Brussels office of the RAND Corporation. He is currently also Director Digital Technology and Macro Strategy at Macro Advisory Partners in London and New York, and Edge Fellow at Deloitte Center for the Edge, where he advises companies and the European Commission on the digital innovation strategies. Besides innovation and technology, Constantijn van Oranje is passionate about art, music, photography, and nature. And so that's his background, but he's done so much more, and I'm so pleased that he's taken time to speak with us. We were reminiscing when we first met almost 4 years ago in Helsinki, Finland. We were on a panel that was titled, Do Startups Need Governments? And we had a really great conversation, and I'm glad that we can continue the conversation, but now we can talk about what are some of the things what are some of the shifts that are taking place. So welcome, Prince Constantine.
Thank you. Thank you for your very generous introduction.
Yes, well, and so for us to get started, we see in the year 2020, we've seen huge disruptions to societies around the world. A discussion, you know, and I just want to get your thoughts in terms of these disruptions have affected all societies, economies, and there are a lot of unknown. And so how has COVID-19 impacted you, you know, from a personal point of view?
Well, in the first place, I know people who have had COVID. I know people that have died of COVID. So I think it's been a very, in that sense, personally, a very impactful period where we were all obviously also in lockdown. Professionally, I must say it's been an incredible challenge, but a very positive one as well, because from the day we had the first signs of lockdown, we shifted to home working. We pivoted our strategy, and we immediately went to survey the startup ecosystem to see what their needs were, and especially what they thought the financial impact would be, and what kind of impact. You know, is it on their investment round, or is it on their liquidity position, or and that gave us that put us in a position to negotiate with the government a loans package for the startup community, because they typically don't fall in the usual support measures. And we did a lot of stuff to really support entrepreneurs, founders in how to pivot, in sharing experience from very experienced founders, so that they could share their experience with the former crises and how to manage the situation. So really for us it was also it's a wake-up call, refocusing the organization, really supporting startups in that sense was had its good and its bad sides, but
yes,
it was
well, and that's very important, because what we see is that this global pandemic isn't limited or localized to any one community or region. And so that's why in this day and age, we really need to consider what is taking place on one side of the globe has the potential to significantly impact many of the others, and especially as it relates to startups and to scale-ups. One of my hats that I wear is that I am the senior advisor for globalization and head of capital markets for Genesis. This is a firm based in the Washington, D.C. area, and we focus on helping companies scale up and grow. And that's one of our missions. And with ICSB, we have a long history of supporting entrepreneurs and businesses. And as the leader of Techleap, and as you being the co-founder of Startup Fest, what attracted you to this segment of the business? Because this is a really a tough, this is the hard part of business, to start and then also to scale up. What was the attraction?
Well, first, I mean, I'm not myself in the business of scaling up, and I fully agree that it's probably the toughest part of business, because so much is unknown. You're fighting against existing market players. You're fighting to get capital. You're fighting to convince staff to stay with you and to grow with you. You have to. Everything is new. No, actually, I did start my own business, and I did come to the conclusion that building a scale-up was not my thing. But no, what attracted me to this sector is that it is full of people with big ideas and with sometimes very interesting technologies. You always have to do something that is, what is something they say 10 times more either efficient or more convenient, or does something so much better than what is already around. So these people, and they don't let them be stopped by all the naysayers. So it's a very positive environment. Mostly, most of the entrepreneurs we work with are working in some way to improve the world. And I used to be working also in environments where there were a lot of people that were more focused on process and on due diligence, all kinds of stuff that is not the actual thing of changing the world, but and so once you put your foot in this, it's, I think, very difficult to get out of it again. The enthusiasm, the can-do mentality, nothing will hold me back. I'll go through this brick wall if I need to, and it's just really stimulating to work with those kind of people.
Great. And I must say that according to the numbers, according to what I've read on the Techleap website, it takes leadership to really be successful, and I must applaud your leadership because the Netherlands continue to be one of the fastest growing startup hubs in Europe, and I wanted to just cite some numbers which are very impressive. The #1 developer of capital in Europe, the #4 best country for business, and this in the world, the #1 most connected economy in the world. These are very impressive numbers. what is your secret sauce? What are some of the best practices that you can share that allowed you to get to this point?
It's obviously all due to Techleap. I mean, no, I think if you look at these benchmarks, I think the Netherlands has a very high average level of everything. So we have high average education, healthcare, connectivity. The position, obviously, at the end of it, it's a river delta, so we have a very strong logistics position, and has a largely bilingual working population. So we have 13 universities. They're all in the top 200 of the world ranking. So there's a lot of, the basic infrastructure is really good, and the people tend to have an attitude of questioning authority. So, and that helps when you want to innovate. So if someone tells you this is the way we always did it, there will always be a Dutchman said why. It can be really annoying, but that kind of keep on questioning and challenging the kind of the legacy state is a good starting position for innovation. So I think, and then we have a number of quite large multinational corporations like Shell and Unilever and Axo, and we have it's now a bit smaller, but we had a very thriving financial sector as well. So the starting position of the Netherlands has been very good. Smaller countries obviously move a bit faster and can be a bit more agile than larger companies. So I think that has something to do with it. And we are in sense of connectedness, we have very say universal broadband coverage at very high speed, and we have many of the transatlantic cables actually come into the Netherlands, and so therefore we are really an internet exchange, which gives us also some advantages. But on the whole, I think it's innovation is in the people, so that's where you have to look for it.
Okay, great. Well, we've seen the unseen effects of COVID-19 have resulted in closed borders and has made us more reliant on technology and on the way we communicate, but both socially and for business. How has this affected the Netherlands, and how is this new normal? Because you have great numbers in terms of Techleap and the connectivity, but now this was a hurdle that we didn't foresee. And how has COVID-19 changed?
Well, I think what we've seen in healthcare, what we've seen in education, what we've seen in the way we work, a lot of the technologies were there, but there just wasn't enough push to adopt them at scale. And now suddenly we see we want telemedicine, we want remote learning, we want all these things, and they are actually there. So for the companies that have been in that space or that have managed to exploit that opportunity, there's massive opportunities ahead. So anything moving towards more digital, more green. I would also say in transitions in food, in mobility, etc., are areas where there's potentially a lot of growth, but also last mile delivery. These things were there, and in the Netherlands we have quite as the population is also very kind of internet savvy. E-commerce was always has been quite a substantial feature of our retail market, but and in some markets that's less the case. And so the Netherlands has really now kind of jumped on the opportunity to adopt that in a much wider scale. So we have seen that the companies that are active in these areas are doing really well. And it's more that they now have to find the capital, and that it's the recapitalization of our venture capital industry, which is going to be an increasing problem going forward, because the businesses are there. But it's how to find capital. That's going to be the big challenge.
It's interesting that as we talked about many years ago when we were in Helsinki, we asked the question whether the question was, do startups need government? And it dealt with what type of policies can government help to create an environment. And I like the fact that you touched on telemedicine and how to use some of these tools that we have, especially the connectivity, to address some of these challenges. COVID-19 affects, you know, the rich and the poor, the educated and those who are uneducated, or those who don't have formal education. And so to create an ecosystem for those funding or those companies to get funding, I go back to the question we discussed a little more than 3 years ago. What can governments do to help to create an ecosystem for investment?
Yeah, just one point before you mentioned COVID is affecting everyone. I do think we see that COVID is disproportionately affecting the people that were already in a less advantaged stage. So people with less access to education, often even we've seen kids getting lost because they don't have the remote access, they don't have the devices, or they have an environment in their homes where they can't learn. So something we really should be aware of is that this crisis has created even bigger disparities in society. But what government can do? Well, as you know, at the time I was a bit skeptical, and I would still be, but I cannot in times of this crisis. Obviously, I have to acknowledge that it really is the government as a kind of a lender of last resort has supported startups with bridge loans, and have developed all kinds of schemes to allow people to stay in their jobs, and that's definitely a role that the government can play. I think also the government can play a role in educating people. Education is by far the most important input. The pool of talent is most important input. Then obviously investing in research, making sure that the technologies are there, that you'll have not only the people, but also the equipment, and also the output of your universities. That's really important. That's typically something the government can support. And then when it gets a bit closer to market, maybe one step before is legislation. Make sure that your legislation is not too restrictive, and that you are actually open to explore the impact of new business models, and which also is relevant for many of the supervisory or regulatory authorities, like in the banking sector. So new solutions require flexibility from the government. And then obviously in attracting capital, we've seen that government have policies that you can actually, by making the primary investment through co-investment schemes or fund of funds, they actually crowd in a lot of private investment. So if you do that well, and also through certain fiscal stimulation, you can actually get quite a high leverage from government money, from private money, then entering the market. So that's definitely a role the government can also play. And but most importantly is that the government needs to have a mindset of innovation and pro-entrepreneurship to allow these things to happen, because it's always a trade-off between different interests. And you see that the countries, I mean, a country like Israel, or say Estonia, also the Netherlands to some degree, and Singapore. These are countries that have clearly understood how important entrepreneurship is, and made it a real priority, and also how important the digital transition is. And they've some of them actually came from further behind, but they've been incredible in picking up and now leading in many domains. So that's definitely something the government has a role to play.
Well, and that's and the insight that you've given in terms of just the breadth, in terms of funding, in terms of encouraging entrepreneurs and those who may need some tools, different type of learning. I think that's very, very important, because what we've seen, especially in light of COVID-19 and with the closed borders, we've seen a disruption in the supply chain. And so borders were closed for a while, and so there weren't a lot of movement going back and forth. And so that created some shortages in each country, whether there were masks or reagents or goggles. How does globalization change? Is there a change to globalization in light of the fact that there are certain key things that each country needs when there's like this type of pandemic?
Well, we do hear a lot about resilient supply chains and autonomy and how this will really translate into the globalized system. I wouldn't know. I do think companies will now reconsider if they have a complex supply chain, that they'll build in some robustness and that you have alternative suppliers in different regions. I think governments are very concerned that they don't have access to certain critical equipment, and I assume that they will build larger inventories for these things. I mean, especially in the medical sphere. But no, so I think we're all become more aware that the optimization of efficiency in supply chains globally, that has its risks as well. But also what I've found is that there's quite an incredible resilience and among entrepreneurs to I mean, in the speed that protective gear was produced in different places where companies were certainly producing respiratory devices, and I mean the ingenuity of people to then suddenly start manufacturing these things. We have, for instance, a company in the Netherlands. They made mattresses, and another was a chemical company, and they joined forces to make protective gear. And Philips, our medical equipment company, they cranked out many more respiratory devices. And so I think everybody started to pull together, and which shows that actually there is quite a lot of resilience in the system. But if you look at a larger industry like the car industry, for instance, they really were starved for spare parts, and you saw that really the whole production of certain industries basically was too dependent probably on parts that were sourced from too far away. And so I think that will change a bit. It's also interesting to see that we hear a lot about that manufacturing has to be brought back in. So for instance, Europe, the whole mantra was we going from manufacturing to services, and all the manufacturing is outsourced. Now we hear a lot about insourcing again, and wanting to build our own manufacturing capabilities on within the continent. So that's definitely happening. And but I do think that companies will we won't see a kind of I don't believe in a full decoupling of the economy. I think companies will look strategically at this, and some parts they'll play the efficiency game and the optimization. On the other hand, robustness is more important, and they will choose their strategies likewise.
Oh, good. And in terms of education, we touched on the fact that the government can play a role in terms of education and access to education. Traditionally, in terms of technology, the university had been highly technical, and but now we're seeing a refocusing on the vocational education, because those who may not have the means or who may not have the access to higher ed, they may be able to go to these schools where they'll learn some of these trades, learn some of the skill sets that work well with manufacturing. Are you seeing a shift or a more of a re-emphasis on the need for that skill set or those type of skill sets?
Well, I think it's too early days, but what I do have noticed, and I don't know if that's a trend, but a discussion emerging at least in my country about do we really need to, shouldn't we integrate the different levels of university, of higher education more? So when you have vocational training, practical on-the-job training, and there's more the conceptual scientific approach of universities, you basically need all of them. If you're an entrepreneur, nowadays you also need to code. It's not anymore that you learn management and then you can be a manager all your life. You want to be an entrepreneur, you need to do more, and you need to be able to work with people with different skill sets, different backgrounds. So I don't know if that's going to be a trend, and I don't know how it's going to be organized, but I do think that there is clearly a need for removing some of those typical silos in education.
Yeah, in terms, yes, and I think that you're right, because what we're seeing, especially with ICSB, and we're in more than 85 countries around the globe, and so we see that the models vary, but what we've advocated for are what we call the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals, and to address the no poverty or clean water and sanitation. I mean, this focuses on especially those who don't have a lot of means. And so when you look at the Netherlands or in greater Europe, how can someone who may not have parents who may have who may have an educated background or a 4-year university background, but yet they're still talents, how can they access this vein of entrepreneurship, and what are some of the tools that have worked that you've seen work?
Well, actually, I find that nowadays more than ever, you see companies emerging from all across the globe. So you see suddenly a unicorn from Nigeria, or from where you probably wouldn't have expected it before. You see a very lively entrepreneurial ecosystem in Nigeria. I have friends we're driving entrepreneurship among young people in Bangladesh, and another friend in Sri Lanka, and everybody is on this kind of entrepreneurship startup bandwagon. And I think it is generally true that also in those countries, most of the people active in the startup ecosystem are higher educated. And but on the other hand, so little is necessary. If you have a mobile phone, you're ready and you are connected to the internet, you can do stuff that you could never do before. So even though that the opportunities are definitely much easier for if you have a higher education, and if you are born in a country with a sophisticated kind of mature economy, there are downsides to that. Let's say in the Netherlands, our downside is where's the urgency? Where's the pain to want to be an entrepreneur? And as you said before, this is one of the hardest things, to be a startup entrepreneur. Why would you go for that if you can just get a job at a bank? Why would you? And I think in other places that urgency is much higher, because the upside is so much bigger, and there's relatively limited downside. Whereas in Holland, and in some countries, there is a downside. In some countries, if you fail as an entrepreneur, that's considered really badly socially, and I think, which I think is really bad, by the way. I think anyone who wants to be an entrepreneur and who tries has probably done more than most other people that never tried and just got a job. But in many countries, it's still a stigma, and so I think. The internet allows us a lot. It allows you to access markets that are distant. It allows you to do organized payments at a distance. It gives you the cloud gives you the compute power that you need. So even in really remote areas, you still, once you got the basic stuff, you can still be an entrepreneur. And then it really becomes also, getting the tools, getting people involved in this. And I'm very hopeful. I wouldn't say this is something that's going to happen from now until the next 5 years. But if you look at the trend, I think the tools that are being developed, the dissemination or democratization of technology. Anybody now can get AI basically from the cloud, and this is so fast. It's the newest technologies. Within a few years, they're just open source. So I'm hopeful that many more people, and the people that are really eager, so the entrepreneurs wherever they are in the world, will continue to get more access and more opportunities than they had ever before.
And that's something that is very much needed, because for many years we've seen brain drain. We've seen those who are very skilled, or because they didn't have have the opportunities or the type of opportunities they had within their respective countries. Some cross borders, some cross the ocean, some cross deserts. That's, to some extent, that's part of the American dream in terms of those who are coming from elsewhere. They're able to make it, and so there's been a belief in terms of that if you're given the right opportunity, then you have a chance to be successful. And the reason why that's so important in light that we're all connected because of technology and broadband, and as we were discussing, the structural inequalities that exists, in light of what we're seeing, for example, what's called the Black Lives Matter movement has gone global, and each country and each region has picked up on some of the dislocations or the inequalities within their society. What has that meant for Europe, or what has that meant for the Netherlands in terms of looking at some of these disparities?
Yeah, well, I think we were one of the first countries where there was a demonstration in support of the Black Lives Matters movement, and I think what we're seeing is that every country, every region, every company, every organization needs to deal with this in some kind of way, and that the killing of Mr. Floyd was a wake-up call to us all, that and we can't just point to the US for these kind of inequalities. The racism is something we experience everywhere, and that we even if we don't like to acknowledge it, it's among us, and we all need to deal with it. So we actually had this week a discussion around diversity in the whole startup ecosystem, and which obviously is as a kind of there's a gender component to that, but it goes further than that. And one of the questions were how do you make this whole tech ecosystem also more diverse? These are entrepreneurs. I mean, we don't choose who becomes an entrepreneur or not. But why is it that in certain groups there are much less entrepreneurs? They don't feel that they are empowered to become an entrepreneur. We see that the investor community has a certain bias, which is not intentional very often, but still the bias is there. And the outcome is that we see that the tech startup system is mostly, at least in Europe, is mostly white and then male. And the more hard tech it gets, the more male it gets. So how do we change that? How do we ensure that the whole entrepreneur base grows, and that also the jobs in tech become more diverse? And that's a challenge. But I think what we all agreed on is that if you want to bet on something, bet on that it becomes more diverse. Bet on diversity as a force for good, because your customer base is more diverse. The talents are in your team. It's really important to have that diversity to get the different points of view. And I'm very fortunate that when I look at my team, I think we have 10 different nationalities. We have slightly more women than men on our team, even though we're in tech. And we see how important it is that you have that kind of diversity in skills, diversity in backgrounds, and diversity in interest, because it just makes you stronger.
And we applaud you for that, because at ICSB we understand that there's strength in diversity of ideas and also of people. I mean, to address many of the challenges we face, sometimes it helps to have someone who comes from who have a different experience. I always say that it's hard for me to understand someone else's viewpoint because I may not see through their eyes. So it's important that we bring those voices to the table. But also, when we look at the economic shifts that have taken place, for us to have stability and for us to build on a system of equality, we must have representation. I always say that it's better to be at the table than just to be on the menu. And so many groups in the past felt that they were on the menu and they weren't at the table. And so that's why when we think of startups, when we think of opportunity, and also going back to the sustainable development goals, that if we wanted to truly have no hunger and no poverty and quality education and equal access, that means that we have to address those who don't have those now. And so the MSME Day, you know, a few years back after we met in Helsinki, I was fortunate that you agreed to provide us a video. I know that at that time that you were on travel, so you couldn't make it to New York, to the United Nations, but you did provide us a video, which was the first Knowledge Day that we celebrated, the MSME Day, which is June 27th. And so, yeah, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the day, you know, have you seen an awareness, more of awareness, because startups are, you know, not just recognized at the local level, but globally, that startups are embraced? And what can we do more? I'm thinking, what can the UN do more, and what can ICSB do more to raise the awareness of startups?
Well, I think, and I can't say what the global movement is, but a few years ago here, there was people felt that the startup thing was at a certain kind of at the top of its hype cycle. Mm-hmm. And then we had the unicorns, and you know, and they now are over their hype cycle, and now we're going back to normal again. I think what in the core, it's about entrepreneurship. It's about shaping your own future, and about giving people capital and the talents and the access that they need to develop their ideas and to build their businesses. That's something that is more and more acknowledged. But still, I find that if I talk to people across the globe, if you ask what do you want your kids to be, they say doctor or lawyer, and a banker maybe, but mostly it's lawyers and doctors. And I said, why not an entrepreneur? And people still consider that to be too risky. But you know, it's I think what we need to emphasize more, and maybe that can be done at the UN level as well, is that being an entrepreneur is the best education. It forces you to find solutions. It forces you to work in teams, to be action and you know, output oriented. So entrepreneurship is actually something, even if you fail, is a life lesson. That and if you try to be an entrepreneur and you then go back to business, you'll be a better manager. And we don't acknowledge that enough. And so we also talk a lot about that failure is okay. I think that's become a bit of a kind of a cliche. I think failure is okay if you tried. And failure just for failure's sake is not that great anyway, because especially not if you have investors investing in you and you fail and you didn't do a job. But if you dreamt big and you took a leap and you took a risk and then you failed, then that's a lesson, because you should see it as an experiment. At least you tried, you learned, you know what doesn't work, and then you go at it again. And I think instead of just expecting everything, and then we're back to the other discussion we had about government, expecting government to take care of everything. Entrepreneurs don't expect the government to take care of anything. They expect the government to stay out of their way, and so that they can get on with their business. And I think that attitude is good, because it gives you more independence, more drive. And in the end, it's the entrepreneurs that create the jobs, and it's the entrepreneurs that develop the solutions. And so I think it's great what you're doing at ICSB, the UN, wherever we can underline that entrepreneurship is important, and that is actually a career option, and that it's not. We don't just need notaries, lawyers, and doctors, even though doctors are really important. But we need more entrepreneurs.
You know, and that's so well said, because our current president, President Ahmed Osman, who is from Egypt, I think I actually see him he's muted, but he has really been he's been an entrepreneur himself, but he's on the forefront of what are some of the things that we want, that we can do as ICSB. And one of the things that he's put forth are what's called these knowledge hubs, that as we work with entrepreneurs and work with companies and within countries, that there are these knowledge hubs where people can, from different backgrounds and or from different lands, that they can communicate and share best practices and share ideas. And so with technology, you know, we talk about social distancing. We've argued at ICSB that it's not actually social distancing, it's more like space distancing or physical distancing, because the internet makes us more socially connected than ever. So we're more socially connected. And so I really appreciate your viewpoint in terms of what entrepreneurs can do, but also what is the ecosystem that we can create. And I want to leave space for some questions, but I want to ask one more question in terms of, when you think of an ecosystem, what are some of the best practices that you believe that we should, because we go all over the world and we share what are some of the things that you need? What are some of the must-haves in terms of ecosystem? What should be part of an ecosystem?
Ooh, well, it must be a willingness to share. So it's a cultural thing as well. An ecosystem means that it's a set of interrelated actors. Some will provide you with the technology, some will provide you with the money, some will provide you with the talents and market entry. And so it's that kind of, it's also the richness of it. So you don't have one person with a certain talent, no, but there's a whole group of it, and you have companies. So basically, if people leave one company, they go to the next and they enrich the other company. So it's that kind of, it's that interaction that's important. So some of the ecosystems we're seeing are too small. They can't really generate that kind of activity. So for tech ecosystems, it's important you achieve a certain critical mass, which, for instance, a challenge in our country is that our biggest city is only 800,000 people, which is Amsterdam. And so we are organizing the tech ecosystem to be the whole country. So it's really important to connect what's happening in the south, where we're seeing where there's a lot of manufacturing and high tech and in optics and semiconductors, with the software that's being developed in Amsterdam or in Groningen in the north of the country, and then the logistics and security that's happening maybe more in Rotterdam and other places. But as a whole, 800,000 city would be too small. And because obviously not everybody's involved in tech. If you compare that to a city like London, or if you could compare it to Silicon Valley. But for instance, if you look at the Netherlands, we're about twice the size of Silicon Valley. So basically you slice the country in half and then you got Silicon Valley. And so these distances are relatively small, but people think in towns and provinces, and you have to, in tech, you have to really support that more global outlook, is that you won't find it in your own town. You have to think broader. You have to create an environment where people want to come, where they want to share, and you have to be connected. And I think this is, probably one of the most important lessons, is you cannot create it by staying local. So if your town wants to be a thriving startup ecosystem, you have to look with who you want to be connected. So for instance, if you're in fintech in Europe, you have to have some connection with what's happening in London, what's happening in New York, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, some of the places where the developers are, where the big institutions are, where the money is. And too often we think of, how do we compete with our neighboring city? Because that's in football, that's okay. In football, you can compete with your neighboring city. You can even compete in your city. But with tech, it's better to get scale.
That's a very enlightening in terms of your sharing, that the need to connect, that you cannot be an island onto your own self. I have a question here that asks, how can tech, how do you teach tech? How do you teach in the time of COVID-19, in this crisis, to address some of the society inequality? I guess the question deals with how do you teach others about what are some of the inequalities and share experiences that they may not have?
Well, actually, what governments can do is when you have either link some of the support to reskilling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important that you involve those training institutions that are close to the people, because we found that that the kind of more established institutions will probably serve the more established social
Mm-hmm.
groups as well.
Yeah.
So for instance, if you want to attract minorities that are not currently in tech, you have to be in the communities. You have to have local stars and mentors that bring people along, and that and because often there's a cultural bias even against, as we said before, but against entrepreneurship, but also
Mm-hmm.
maybe tech, and the tech community might not be too hospitable, because if you only see white men, why would you want to go there if you're from a different social background? Because if that's what we're communicating,
Mm-hmm.
so it's difficult to do this at scale, but I think there are institutions that do this well, and there are, for instance, we have in the Netherlands something called CODAM, which is a collaboration from a French initiative called École 42, which is a school that teaches coding, but without teachers. So it's infinitely scalable, and they have trained tens of thousands of people, and they are really targeting on getting other demography into the tech ecosystem. So more women, more people from minority backgrounds, to make sure that it's more diverse. And but it's difficult. Yes.
Well, we have another question that actually adds on to what you just said. This question states that the OECD study of Dutch higher ed found that you're ahead of most countries, including the US, in terms of integrating higher education to make it more accessible to all. And so I think that you've answered this, but they want to know, how were you able to integrate your higher ed and be so successful? What are some of the lessons that we can take away?
Well, I don't know exactly if that's the case, how we compare to other countries. I do know that in many European countries, education is very cheap or free.
Mm-hmm.
So though it's not free in the Netherlands, it is very affordable, and
Mm-hmm.
And students get support, government support for housing, for also for transport, and for purchasing books and equipment. So that definitely is a factor that lowers certain barriers. Then
Mm-hmm.
there still are many cultural barriers. Still, I mean, if you look at the output of our university, it's still not that as diverse as our society is. Mm-hmm. So there's still biases there. And so I don't think anyone can congratulate themselves until we really, achieve even much better results than we are currently achieving.
Okay, good. Well, one of the, I've been to the OECD conference. There's something called the Working Policy for Small and Medium Enterprises, and I've always been impressed with the work that the Dutch delegation put forth, because they really have a policy to support small business, and I can see.
Winslow, you're being far too kind to me.
Okay.
And
well,
my country.
But this is what I've seen.
If you want a job as my marketeer, then you're hired.
Well, you have made the invitation that I'll make sure to come and visit you when I am in when I do visit you in Holland. But micro businesses, I know that you're looking at scale up, but there is a class of micro businesses. I don't know what is, I didn't look at the numbers. Do you have a sense of those mom and pop shop businesses, and what can be done to encourage them to scale up? Because so many of them, they are small and they want to stay small, but yet they have the opportunity to scale up and then to hire more people. What can be said to them, those mom and pop shops?
Well, I think first you need to establish if they really want to grow. Right? Some of them don't want to. I mean, this is the. I think this COVID crisis is actually going to make this be an incredible triage, because you have to choose. I think many companies will go broke, and the government is keeping them afloat. But in anything in the event sector and in food and beverages and travel, it's extremely difficult, and we don't know how long the government can support this. So the question then arises: what do you want to be? Do you want to stay the company that you are, or do you want to make a leap forward? Do you want to start selling online? I mean, a friend of my wife's, he has a shop on the open market here in The Hague. It's called the Haagse Markt, and he sells dresses. And his father was there before him, and he also sells dresses. But he said, this is not good enough for me. So he started his web shop, and he has his own designs. And he now has his web shop is obviously much bigger than his local store, but he still has his shop on the market. His father doesn't, and now he's helping his father by photographing the collection and putting him online and helping him go online as well. And I think that is happening now. So you basically don't have a choice. If you have your market stall and the market is closed because there's on a lockdown, these markets were too crowded and they closed them down, then you have just one option, and that's going online. And then once you're online, you say, hey, wait a minute, many more people are coming through my store than they would actually come to the market. And so some people make this leap forward, and sometimes it's the younger generation. Sometimes it's generations helping each other. But there is going to be, I think it is a very sad story, but many companies are going to actually fail, and others might actually grasp this opportunity to make this step forward, because we have to still acknowledge that many of our SMEs are still not online, and that in many countries there are many companies that still don't have a website, and that's that's fine if that's your choice, but where the market is going, and then where the next generation is going to shop. And they might not even shop only online, but they do want to look for the products online, and they do want to compare online. And there's all kinds of services that you're then not part of. So I think governments can do something in helping these companies to make that step. But it has to come from the entrepreneur themselves. They have to decide what kind of business they want to be, and if they actually want to step into that adventure.
Okay. Well, micro, small, and medium enterprises is, we're going to acknowledge and celebrate their day, June 27th. I know we talked about the history of this day, but the fact that it's on June 27th is significant, because the United Nations was founded on June 26, 1945, and I think by 45 countries in San Francisco. And the reason why we, Dr. Terabishi chose June 27th or wanted that day is that when all wars come to an end, when crises come to an end, then the next day, the small business owner, the entrepreneur, the shop owner, they'll go outside and they'll sweep in front of their shop and they'll put up their shingle. They get back to work in building society. COVID-19 has devastated many of our societies, and we're still living through it. And we were due to have our conference, our World Congress, in June 20 in Paris in 2020, but because of COVID-19, we're not going to have it this year. But I would love, but I want to extend an invitation for 2021. July 12th to the 16th, for you to join us to be our special guest in Paris, so July 12th to the 16th, 2021 in Paris, where we're going to celebrate ICSB and MSME. And so I hope that your schedule will allow. We would welcome you to come and share with us and your thoughts in terms of how we can move forward. I know that we've taken up a lot of your time, but I want to give you some time to share with us, what are your thoughts in leadership? What what are some of the things that we should know or should consider, especially in times of crisis?
Oh, you know, this is this puts me on the spot. I must say I don't really feel I can speak to that. I mean, I have not acknowledged or experienced crisis like many other people have. So I'm very fortunate working for an organization. My pay is still paid, and I'm you know, my family's doing well, and I see what I see people that are, when they are in the middle of a crisis, actually completely despair. And I can't, it's difficult for me to tell them anything what they should do. But I do see people, maybe that's a way out of this embarrassing answering your question. I do see people that after, in their businesses, that after a first week maybe of being completely devastated, they pick up the shambles, and they pull the team together and said, okay, well, now what do we do? So first is you extend your runway. So you have to ensure that you hold on to your cash, and then you start thinking about how can we make something out of this, because we don't know how long this is going to last. And the only thing you know is you have full uncertainty. That's your certainty. And then you start building from there. And I must say I've seen really impressive people from all walks of life, not just entrepreneurs, but also artists that have tried to find their way, and chefs in the restaurants trying to make a business, and musicians that were housebound and still, you know, they were writing music and they were performing online in all kinds of ways. And this is definitely it's not a solution, but it's for your mind. I think it is you're working on something going forward. And I think that's the only thing we have. We have the hope, and we have the hope, and we know that this is going to end. And we have the hope it ends fast. But the certainty we have is that we are ourselves with each other, and that if you are with a good team of people, you also in this time you can achieve remarkable things. And we should always know that many great companies have grown and organizations have grown out of a crisis. And as you just said, the United Nations was extraordinary. It was just after the Second World War ended that we managed to pull together an organization like the UN. So out of the ashes, new things grow, and there are always people that stand up and make that work, and everybody could be that person.
Well said. Well, I want to give. I want to bring in our president, Ahmed Osman, I'm going to put him on the spot to say a few words, and then I'll pass the baton to Dr. Tarabishi for us to finish. President Osman?
Hello, good evening, Prince Constantine and Winslow. Thank you very, very much for this very, very informative and great session. I totally agree with all what was said. Governments, I always thought, should have a minimal role to play with SMEs, but you know, with the COVID pandemic happening, the governments have played a very positive role in many countries in supporting SMEs. So I think governments have a role to play, a balanced role, if I may say. They have to support SMEs. They have to decrease and take away any obstacles from their way, make them do business in an easier way. And I totally agree with all what you have said in this session. And I thank you very, very much for your time. We really appreciate it as ICSB. And thank you, Winslow, for putting me on the spot.
Well, thank you, President Osman. Dr. Tarabishi, do you want to have
yes,
final words?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Winslow. Thank you very much, President Osman here. Prince Constantine, in 2017, you started a trend here when you sent us a video statement using your cell phone for 2017 at the United Nations. And you did not realize this, but you're an entrepreneur that started this whole movement here, because for this year, for MSME Day, dignitaries, ministers, ambassadors from all the world are doing the same thing. So they're following you, sending us video statements from around the world. So you can say, I started a movement, which is video statements coming out. So thank you very much.
Yes, okay, great. Well, I want to thank you again, Prince Constantine. Really appreciate your thoughts, your friendship, and look forward to working with you on many things, and And please give my best to you and your family.
Thank you very much. And we'd like to welcome you to the Netherlands soon.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Tammy. Thank you, Kyle. Bye-bye.
God bless.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.